verses 1 to 13, which can be found on page 1151. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that was accompanied by them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by a destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it.
Thank you, Lausanne. Don't be idolatrous. Don't commit adultery. Don't test the Lord. Don't go grumbling. Very sticky end, I don't know if you noticed, for the grumbler, the destroying angel. Sounds like something from a Spielberg movie, doesn't it? Do's and don'ts. It's not terribly encouraging, is it? If it's your first time or you're new to church, perhaps you haven't been for a long time, or I've just been for a few weeks, be natural if you're thinking, great, just what you'd expect in church. Religious rules, do's and don'ts. Exactly what puts people off, isn't it? Religion, a list of do's and don'ts. What a naughty boy or a naughty girl you've been. What is good about that? What is good about that? Do's and don'ts, religion. Here, a Christian newspaper. No, I'm not getting the action, Jennifer. A friend from church was recently out for a meal with work colleagues. When the terrorist threat from jihadists, now a given in modern life, the conversation turned to the evils of religion. To their surprise, my friend, whom they knew to be a Christian, said he agreed with them. How come? It's often been rightly said that Jesus came not to bring a new religion, but a new relationship. His hallmark was introducing an almost new name for God, our Father. He brings us into the family of God, spiritually by new birth, and forensically by justification and adoption. No, Jennifer, you're going to have to help me. I'm not getting it. Next one, thank you. The evidence shows the Lord Jesus was vehemently against religion. Religion focuses on us. It majors on us keeping rules, following the right example, doing good in order, supposedly, to gain favor with the Almighty. The Pharisees were the great religionists of Jesus' day, and he rebuked them in no uncertain terms. Religion burdens sensitive people and crushes them because they know they can't make the grade. It turns people who think they can be good enough into boasting hypocrites. It blinds people to themselves as they persuade themselves they are good enough. It encourages people to be bullies and persecutors. Those who don't keep the rules deserve to be shot. Don't worry if you're thinking you need to go to Specsavers. My photography wasn't great on that one. That last observation touches on today's text. Religion blinds people to themselves as they persuade themselves they are good enough. That's the Corinthians in a nutshell. The Corinthians had become complacent. Let's look at verse 12. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. So this is where we're going today. Thank you. Beware of complacency, assuming on God's grace, but not having your heart changed by it. Beware of complacency, assuming on God's grace, but not having your heart changed by it. To be honest, if you just write that down in the blank space next on the notice sheet, you're done really. You can have a snooze for the rest of it. If you just remember that, I'd be happy on the way out. That is our take home. Paul's challenge then for us today, put bluntly, is just this. Are you sure you've grasped God's love for you? Are you sure? Because to be honest, if it doesn't affect your heart, if it doesn't affect what you set your heart on, well then you haven't grasped it. You see, that's what makes the difference between do's and don'ts of religion. The difference between that and the good news of the Christian faith. It's all about motivation. For the Christian, it's not a list of do's and don'ts that get yourself right with God. It's not that. No. Instead, a God who loves us beyond measure. We can't fully comprehend the extent of that love, his grace to us in Jesus. God lavishes his grace on us. And it's our grasp of that, it's that stirs our heart to change. So the do's and don'ts, they're not a ladder to climb to get right with God, but they are what it looks like to be already one of God's loved people. Do you see the difference? Massive distinction between Christianity and all the other religions. We had a barbecue for the youth last night, and that was one of the questions they asked me. What is the difference? So these rules, if you like, they're the characteristic of those who know God's grace. And that's actually where Paul starts. We looked at it a bit last week. So if you're watching the news and you're worrying about the international stage that seems to be increasingly volatile, I heard this morning that some of the kind of senior military personnel are saying it's less than 5 years now before we'll be at war. I wonder if I once had to learn a Churchill quote, which I think applies here. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I reckon Paul must have been reading some of Churchill's speeches as he penned 1 Corinthians, because that's exactly what he says. That's exactly what he says. We're going to go back to Israel's history, way back to the time of Moses. Now, just in case you're tempted to think at that point, history, not that interesting, a bit boring, you might want to check out verses 11 and 12 before you conclude that. So we can reap the fruits of their experiences, learn from their mistakes. God in his grace rescued all the Israelites, but not all the Israelites were authentic believers. So God in his grace rescued all the Israelites from Egypt, but not all the Israelites were authentic believers. Let's read verses 1 to 5. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. So Paul reminds them at the start of the mess that the Israelites made of things way back in Moses' time. There is a gripping account of those events in Exodus if you'd like to read it later. So there they are, escaping slavery in Egypt, running from Pharaoh's crack troops, and there was no scaling back in Pharaoh's budget for his armed forces. These were the top armed forces. The Israelites, on the other hand, humanly speaking, not so much as a single air rifle among them. Humanly speaking, the odds were stacked against them. The victory, however, was theirs, or rather God's. Faced with the world's superpower and her army, no match for God. No match for God. Pillar of cloud by day leading them out of captivity, pillar of fire at night, awe-inspiring stuff. But hemmed in by the Red Sea, massive army thundering towards their chances looked grim. But I know, their all-powerful God has a plan. The scale of that rescue is immeasurable. The Red Sea's parted, and they passed through to the other side. So they not only escaped the Egyptians, but the world's most powerful army is then drowned. Humanly speaking, this is off the scale. We're so familiar with the story, aren't we? We don't grasp how significant this is. So God's dedication to his people, right before their eyes, God pouring out his grace to them. Now, in return, you might expect them to be positive about that, to respect it and have this sort of awestruck status, but I don't know. Their first Instagram post is this: "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the desert?" Well, that's not very grateful, is it? There's no bread, there's no water, and we detest this miserable food. What a grateful bunch, eh? They moaned. Now, God would have good basis, wouldn't he, at that point, to stop following them on Instagram. Instead, he supplies them a continental breakfast in the morning, roast quail in the evening, and an unending supply of fresh spring water. Miraculous. All of them enjoyed God's goodness to them. He rescued all of them from Egypt. But they took it all for granted and grumbled instead. And so, verse 5, it's been so good so far. There we go. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now, Paul could have been mistaken for being British with an understatement like that. Do you know only two of them actually made it to the promised land? So when he says most of them, but practically all of them except two. Okay, so history lesson, that's the history lesson. So what? What's that got to do with the Corinthians? Well, here's the clever bit. Did you notice that Paul's language, as he retells the story, Paul links the events in the desert to baptism? Did you notice that? And to Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper. And he mentions that it's Jesus that's with them. Did you notice that? So this analogy of baptism, well, it's not about getting wet. It's about identity, a new identity. Baptism doesn't make somebody a Christian. It's not a vehicle to heaven. It's a signpost. I was chatting to somebody the other day, and we got onto the topic of God and faith. And this person said to me that they are a Christian. The conversation continued. I was quite pleased and excited to hear that. Some minutes later in the conversation, he said that he didn't believe in God and all that stuff. Okay, seems puzzling, doesn't it? How does he fit the two together? Or is his understanding just where we get if the church falls down on this issue that Paul is highlighting? The Israelites complacently thought that they were right with God. After all, he'd rescued them, hadn't he? They were assuming on his grace to them. They became complacent, taking God's loving grace for granted, if they'd really grasped it in the first place, of course. We're going to see that Paul is saying to the Corinthians, you're just the same. You're just the same. Don't go supposing that because you've now got baptized and you go to Holy Communion, don't go supposing you're right with God. The Israelites were shown God's grace, but they fell in the desert. They became complacent. They didn't make it to the promised land because of their presumption that they were in with God, and that didn't need to affect them. God's grace abounds even more for the Corinthians. But if they don't get it, if they don't understand that grace, and it makes not a jot of difference to their heart's desires, well, then they're just as culpable, aren't they, as the Israelites? If the Israelites or the Corinthians had any grasp of God's grace to them, well, then it couldn't but affect their lives, their ambition, their heart's desires. Paul's saying to the Corinthians, don't be complacent. Baptism is a sign. It doesn't make you a Christian. So let's go back to the chap I was speaking to. See, because he was baptized at some point, perhaps a baptism disconnected from a response to the gospel of Jesus Christ on the part of himself or his parents, he calls himself a Christian. But he doesn't think that should change anything, even believing in God. Now, I doubt it's his fault. It just the end result of where the church assumes the same as the Israelites. And that reflects in its practice. Baptism divorced from the gospel and authentic faith. Some of you will know that if somebody comes from outside the church and asks to have their child baptized, we actually don't just say yes here. We say, well, that's fantastic. We're really excited. We see it as a real gospel opportunity. But we ask them to come along to 5 evenings of Christianity Explored. Or we ask them to come along to church for 3 months, just to find out what it is that they're actually getting involved in. Now, some of you might know that some churches will quite happily do a baptism. I call it a black market baptism. No one else is there, just the vicar and the warden. They do it in the afternoon. You just bring your family, quiet under the counter job. That's not baptism, is it? What is that about? It's no wonder people end up thinking they're a Christian, but they don't have to believe in God. Paul doesn't want the Corinthians to be under any illusion. In the gospel of Jesus Christ, they've experienced even greater blessing than the Israelites, haven't they? For the Christian to forget that and to drift away from faith would be an even greater mistake than the Israelites. Do we know someone presuming on God's grace, maybe even thinking that because they've been baptized, because they're taking communion, because they come to church, maybe we're thinking, because I do my quiet time, I go to home group, I've got that box ticked. Paul says, no, you can't pull the wool over God's eyes like that. The proof is, where are your hearts? If you've really grasped God's love for you, if you've really grasped his grace, well, then that changes everything. It has to change everything. See, the telltale sign is what our hearts desire. Verse 6, now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. That's where the Israelites showed their true colours. God's grace to them made no difference to how they lived their lives. And there's a danger that we over-intellectualise our response to the gospel. We make it all about thinking. So we change our thinking, but nothing radically changes in our lives. By hearts, Paul means the control centre, not just our emotions, but our whole life, what we're about. The person who's getting their head around what God has done for them will see a shift in their hearts, won't they? Has to be the case. That didn't happen with the Israelites, says Paul. So God in his grace rescued all the Israelites, but not all the Israelites were authentic believers because, despite God's grace, their heart's desires weren't changed. And then Paul picks 4 examples, random, we might think, or maybe not. Let's read 6 to 10. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. At the end of the great rescue, Moses up the mountain getting the 10 commandments. Meanwhile, back at base camp, do you remember the story? The rest of the Israelites are busy smelting down all their bling to make it into their own god, a nice golden calf. See, this incident of the golden calf stands in biblical history as one of the most horrifying, horrific warnings against the fickle nature of our hearts, doesn't it? They've just been through that enormous rescue. And because Moses is away for a little while, they get a bit bored and they make their own god. It's horrific, isn't it? It's horrific. Our hearts are so fickle. The issue of idol worship is right up there for the Corinthians too. Remember all the fuss over food sacrificed to idols. We had that before, didn't we? David Jackman writes this on this section. We had him last week. I think we've got the same commentary. It has become almost a cliche to describe the gods and shrines that dominate our increasingly pagan Western culture in terms of materialistic values and desires. This is such a familiar truth that we often lose the sense of betrayal and treachery that should strike our consciences whenever we desert the living God for our own tawdry trinkets. Just leave that up there for another 30 seconds. Just read it through again. Tawdry trinkets. That is it, isn't it? The things that we go after. By and large, tawdry trinkets. Here's Jesus' own chilling diagnosis. That attempt to serve God and anything or anyone else at the same time actually reveals that we don't serve God at all. So Paul's phrase, setting our hearts on evil things, may seem a bit over the top, but he's saying we dare not fall into the same complacency as the Israelites. This is not just a matter of avoiding the worst of our cultural norms, the soft porn TV shows, not reading 50 Shades of Grey. It is that, of course, but it is much more than that. These verses urge us to look deeper at what is really driving our lives. What's really driving our choices? What's really driving our values? Where are we looking for our fulfillment? That is a massive one, isn't it? What is at the bottom line that we'd never be willing to give up? What is your bottom line? What is your thing that you would never be willing to give up? Because can you see, if it's a rival to God and the gospel, we've already fallen to idolatry, haven't we? I can't see how it isn't anything other than that. That's the litmus test. Sexual immorality was a big issue in Corinth. You could go off to a temple and choose the gender of the person that you had sex with. They're all waiting there to meet your every need. But you see, the reality is that often follows quickly on the heels of idolatry. If we will not worship God as creator, well, then we end up worshipping ourselves as creatures, don't we? Let me say that again. If we will not worship God as creator, we end up worshipping ourselves as creatures. And of course, sexual gratification, well, that's the best means to achieve that. How is it possible to say that we worship a God of complete faithfulness to us, and if we're married, be unfaithful to our marriage partner? How is that possible? Read the Exodus account, and the Israelites' behavior towards God is shocking, utterly ungrateful, moaning instead of praising, doubting God instead of trusting him, moaning that he'd got it all wrong. That's precisely where complacency to God will lead any one of us to. We imagine we could do a better job. We'd govern things differently. We'd be better if we were in charge. When we doubt God's got it right, it's an attitude that is putting God under test. And so the lesson from history, verse 11, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. So you ever tempted to think the Old Testament isn't relevant to you as a Christian living in New Testament times? No. It's written for our benefit, isn't it? Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So beware of complacency, assuming on God's grace, but not having your heart changed by it. The question to ask ourselves is to what extent we've grasped God's love for us, if it isn't affecting our heart's desires. There's no denying it. It's an awkward question. It's not easy, is it? But the outcome of these events suggests complacency carries high stakes. God's warning us because he loves us. Some of you will know that my brother was a copper. He's recently retired. And for part of his career, he was an armed officer in Essex Police. And it was at the time when a large passenger jet was hijacked and landed at Stansted Airport. The hijackers didn't let the passengers off for days. So for 4 days, as negotiations with the hijackers took place, my brother was one of the poor coppers who had to lie on the tarmac, pointing his gun at the door constantly, his gaze rooted on that one door without distraction. Can you imagine? This went on for hour after hour, shift after shift, as the days went by. But not for one moment could he be allowed a second of complacency. The stakes were too high. Though an apparently straightforward task, complacency could, of course, potentially have been catastrophic. Never could he have been allowed to think, it's okay, we're safe, nothing's happened for days, nothing will happen. See, the lesson of Israel's history is the same. You cannot afford to be complacent. Don't take your eyes, or perhaps your hearts, off God. So, is this all just another nag? Is this Christians should do better from Paul? And besides, don't we all fall to these temptations? Don't we? I do. Of course I'm an idolater, and I'd like to suggest so are you. I'm sexually immoral. I'd like to suggest so are you. I test the Lord. I grumble, as I imagine, do you? So are we doomed? Is it the destroying angel that's currently on his way to the vicarage as we speak? Hopefully he'll arrive after the hog roast, otherwise it'd be a terrible waste, wouldn't it? You see, the answer is that careful phrase that Paul uses, setting our hearts. Paul's phrase is setting our hearts. There's the hope. That's the distinction. If when I realise something is coming before God in my life's devotion, if I realise that and I turn to him in prayer and I seek his forgiveness, well then don't I set my heart back on him? Isn't that the key? If when you grumble you feel ashamed and seek God's forgiveness, then that's not a heart set on evil. That is setting your heart again to what's right. So the grumbling, do you see, leads to repentance. It's what we're doing with the realization that we've turned away from God that matters. Because the complacent will sin and won't be fussed about it. It'll make not a jot of difference. Oh, never mind, it's grace. But if you sin and say, what have I done? I'm so sorry, God. All the difference in the world. What sets the direction of your heart? Are you setting it by God's grace? The daily practice of prayer before our loving Father, of reminding of ourselves of his grace to us, that will lead us to repentance for where we fail, won't it? If you're reminded of what God's done, if you remind yourself in prayer what he's done for you, well, that can't but lead to us setting our hearts on him, can it? I've said before, but I long remember one preacher I heard say that if we can't name our top 3 idols in an instant, so now, in your head, top 3 idols, if you can't name them, chances are they've already got their claws into you. If we don't know what our idols are, how can we daily repent of them? Set our hearts on God. So being a Christian isn't about being perfect, adhering to those do's and don'ts. It is about a relationship. Next slide, please, Stefan. Jesus didn't come to bring a new religion, but a new relationship. So let's hear the promise of Scripture in verse 13. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. I became a Christian just before my final year at uni. It's a 4-year course. And so I'd had 1 year of being a Christian. And at the end of uni, I decided to take a gap year and backpack around the world. And my mum, who'd been involved in leading me to faith, bought me a little sort of Bible that I could easily pack in my backpack. And in the front of it, she wrote that verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13. I never really got to ask her why she felt that was necessary, but I guess we can imagine why she thought that should be the verse in the front of my Bible as I head off around the world. Friends, as we wrestle with these things in our hearts, they're not unique. Everyone is in the same boat. God's not daft. He knows the temptations that steer our hearts, our desires away from him. Of course he does. But be sure you don't have to fall to it, he's saying. You have a choice. He knows you. He'll order events to give you a way out. The complacent, presuming on God, doesn't even look to avoid that temptation. The Christian looking to God will take the way out to avoid it. They'll change the TV channel. They'll know what things they mustn't come even near for risk of temptation. Beware of complacency, assuming on God's grace, but not having your heart changed by it. I don't know how you came this morning. I don't know what you were thinking about your Christian life and your Christian discipleship. I don't know whether you come with confidence. I don't know whether you come with pride, or whether you do come with humble awareness. But I just want to say this: beware of complacency, assuming on God's grace, but not having your heart changed by it. Rejoice in God's grace for sure, but it gives no grounds for complacency. I think it'd be great, wouldn't it, just to have a few minutes, maybe bow your head or look back over that text, and then will lead us in prayer. But let's just have a few minutes quietly to reflect on this text.